Hi, my name's Sarah Kilmer, and I'm the psychologist at Cardiac and Pulmonary Rehab, and I'm going to be talking about lifestyle management. And by this, we mean talking about ideas about how to change old habits and build new ones. And the reason why we have this topic is because a lot of what you're doing to try to improve your health does involve changing your lifestyle. And if you've ever tried to make a lifestyle change in the past, you know that this often can be a very challenging thing to do. Now, if you've been struggling in the past with it or are struggling right now, please know that you're not alone. And a lot of research has been done, and there's some things that really can make it much more manageable. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So first, I just want to give you a little background to kind of help frame our thinking about this whole process. And the first point is just that, by and large, most people change on their own when they're ready to do so and when it makes sense to them. And I know this may come across as a very common sense notion, but it is worth reflecting on because there are some valuable lessons that come from this point, I think. I'll try to give examples as we go through. So what might this look like? Lots of people can make lifestyle changes when they're in a structured program. But then what happens after you graduate and 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, years go by? And there are a fair number of people who give up the healthy habits and return to the old ways. But when they look at people who stick with change over the long run, they do tend to be people who were motivated. It felt like it was a plan that suited who they were, and they felt an active sense of authorship over the plan. Let's say I'm trying to exercise more and somebody tells me, oh, I should do it first thing in the morning because then I won't put it off and run out of time. It'll boost my energy. It'll give me a great sense of accomplishment. That might sound terrific. But then I also need to run it through my personal filter. And, maybe I think, oh, geez, sounds good, but I'm not really a morning person. Or maybe I think, well, I am a morning person, but if I look down the road to the future, I may not want to be doing that in the winter when it's cold and it's dark out. So it's always important to take the information you get from your healthcare professionals and then run it through this filter of who am I and how can I make this work? Maybe I'm not going to be the person who would reliably exercise in the morning, but I actually really would stick with it at lunchtime, or maybe I'm going to use it at the end of the day as a stress reliever. So again, all of this is to say your active involvement is really important. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that the way we think about the change process is really powerful. If you think back to a time when you were trying to make a change and you think about what it looked like, chances are it wasn't all a straight line towards success. I think that doesn't happen that often for most of us. Instead, it often feels like a few steps forward, a step back, and it's kind of this up and down process, and that can be a source of frustration. But simply knowing that that is a typical part of the change process can help us. If we have a setback or a relapse or get off track, it can help protect us from viewing it as a failure. Because if we feel like we've failed, we may feel defeated and not want to keep trying. But, if we can understand the rocky nature of the change process and then view that setback as a source of information so that we can troubleshoot and problem solve and get back to the change, then we might be more successful, and we might even figure out how to stick with the change over the long run. Now, another thing to pay attention to is the confidence that you have that you can reach your goals. This thing, it's called self-efficacy, is very important for succeeding. And it's okay if you're starting at a place where your sense of confidence isn't all that high, because it's actually something that you can build. And things that help build your confidence and the ability to change overlap a great deal with what you're doing when you're participating in cardiac or pulmonary rehab. So it includes identifying and setting reasonable goals, reviewing those goals, getting feedback from people with expertise, tracking and monitoring your progress, identifying where there might be barriers or problems, and then problem solving to overcome those difficulties. So again, if you're not feeling super confident about some of the changes you're about to embark on, that's okay. The process can help you build that confidence as you move through it. Now, before we talk about some specifics about sort of ways to set goals or change habits, I want to give you a little bit of background about what habits are, because if we understand the nature of them, then some of the strategies for dealing with it will make more sense. So, the way we tend to operate as human beings is that when we do the same thing over and over again, our brain recognizes that pattern and it becomes a habit. So a habit is a pattern of behavior that with repetition becomes like a behavior loop. And the kind of thinking involved in habits is very quick. It doesn't take a lot of effort. It's kind of like being on autopilot in a way. And there is something that's useful to this. I mean, habits certainly can make us more efficient, and it's useful if the habit is a healthy one. So for example, let's say I'm in the habit of brushing my teeth every night after dinner. The end of dinner comes. I don't sit at my kitchen table thinking through every single step. I don't think, well, where do I keep my toothbrush? Which brand of toothpaste am I using? How much should I put on my toothbrush? Should I brush my upper teeth first or the lower teeth? Do I go in circles or back and forth? No, I don't do that. It would be exhausting. We'd get nothing done. But instead, the kind of thinking that happens is I recognize that it's the end of dinner, and then, ding, I get up and I go brush my teeth. And it just happens semi-automatically. So this is a way in which habits can be helpful to us. Now, habits can also be harmful if they involve unhealthy behaviors. So let's say this time my habit at the end of dinner is to go to my freezer and get a big bowl of ice cream. So now what happens is it's the end of dinner and, ding, my brain automatically moves on to the next thing in the series, and I may find myself halfway through a big bowl of ice cream before I've even had time to consider things like, am I still hungry? Do I really want ice cream? What were my nutrition goals, and did they include this big bowl of ice cream? So you can see how habits can be driving our behavior and kind of get away from us pretty quickly. Now, there are all different kinds of factors that can affect habits and when they kick in. They certainly can be triggered by a variety of things. They certainly can be triggered by things in our environment or being in a particular situation. Also things internal to us, our emotional state or our stress level. Habits also occur in a larger context or routine in your life. So there might be an immediate trigger, but there might be a whole sequence of events that start tracking us in that direction. So in my ice cream eating example, let's say it's not even just the fact that it's the end of dinner that's triggering me. It might have started long before that when I got home and I went and sat on the couch and kind of, took out my phone and got lost in looking at things there. And then suddenly it was too late to exercise, and then it was too late to cook a healthy dinner. And so I was feeling sort of stressed and frustrated. And then the end of dinner rolls around and I'm eating the ice cream because I was kind of on this trajectory of unhealthy things. So, you want to take a look at close-in triggers as well as the pattern that surrounds it, the larger routine. And to just keep in mind that habits are hard to change because the kind of thinking involved is quick and relatively effortless, and behavior change or following through on your long-term goals is a much slower and more effortful kind of thought process. And so you're often running in the direction of the habits before you've really had a chance to engage with that other kind of thinking about what you should be doing instead. And so there's kind of this imbalance. And I think that helps explain why habits are so hard to change and can help us be kind with ourselves when we get off track. And then it also can point us in the direction of strategies that can help us disrupt the old habits and build new, healthier ones. So when it comes to changing old habits, one of the keys is breaking the pattern. Identify a specific change you want to make, try to identify the triggers, and then disrupt the pattern. And so, if I'm trying to not eat ice cream after dinner, then maybe I do something different at the end of dinner so that I'm not as likely to still be in the kitchen and end up at the freezer. Or maybe I look at the overarching pattern and I try to disrupt what's happening as soon as I come home. So maybe I leave my shoes by the door, my walking shoes, my sneakers. And so I come home and I trip over my sneakers, and that reminds me that I shouldn't go park myself on the couch and start on this downward slide for the evening. Instead, I should change my shoes and go for a walk. You're probably going to have to observe your habits for a little while before you can make these kinds of changes. But again, you want to try to disrupt the pattern, identify triggers, and then if you can, substitute a healthier alternative for dealing with the trigger. So let's say, for example, you're somebody who eats or smokes when you're feeling stressed out. Stress will be an important trigger for you to pay attention to, and then it'll be useful to find some specific other things that you can do to deal with the stress that's healthier. So maybe you're going to exercise or call a friend or listen to music or read a book or any number of things that might make sense to you. And then certainly as you're going through this process, it can be helpful to use reminders. So if you've got Post-it notes or calendars or, put chimes and reminders on your phone, use those external cues to get you thinking in a more conscious way as opposed to just falling into your default setting. And then, if you've got positive and supportive people in your life, you can try to get them on board and help you out too. Now, when it comes to building new habits, it can be really useful to set goals, and you may have heard about goal setting from your coordinator or other people at the program, and I'm going to speak to it a little bit as well. There are certain ways to build goals that tend to be more useful than others, and the first step is to build a goal that is specific rather than abstract. So oftentimes I think people have goals to be healthier, be stronger, things like that. And that's a great starting point. The difficulty is that it's too vague. Really doesn't point you in a direction. There's no way to know what you're going to do. And it's certainly going to be hard to track any kind of progress. So the idea is that it's useful to get down into the details. And that makes it much more likely you'll follow through. And I'll talk in a minute about what kind of details you would want to include. Now, another thing that you can try to do is include a process element and not just focus on outcome. So you may have outcomes in your goals. You're going to try to lose 5 pounds or, walk a certain distance, and that certainly can be useful when it comes to keeping track of your progress. The thing that gets a little tricky, though, is that sometimes when people accomplish that particular outcome, they can feel like it's done, it's completed, and then they just go back to what they were doing before. And so the idea with the process element is that there's no end point to it, and it really speaks to this idea that we're going to try to make this a way of life rather than just a temporary change. And so, you may have your goal to lose 5 pounds, and the process element is that you're going to be eating fish 3 times a week. Or you may have a goal to walk a certain distance, and the process element is that you're going to be exercising 3 or 4 times per week. And then the last one here is to have a goal that is phrased in positive terms rather than negative. And here positive means taking action, and negative means restraining ourselves or not taking action. And this is related to the fact that another thing about the way human beings tend to operate is that we tend to do much better taking action rather than holding ourselves back. So in my ice cream eating example, I'm probably going to be a lot more successful if I've structured my goal that I'm going to eat fruit 3 nights a week or go for a walk right after dinner 3 or 4 nights a week rather than just not eat ice cream. Now, when you are getting down into the details of making a specific action plan, the kinds of questions you want to be able to answer are, what are you going to do? How much of it? When? and how often. If you can put it in writing, that can be helpful. It also can be helpful to then transfer this plan onto your weekly calendar so that you are budgeting time for it. You've got the visual reminder coming from your calendar, and you also have a place to check it off and track your progress. Another rule of thumb is to think about your goal and ask yourself really honestly if you could see yourself taking action on it in the next week. And if you're about 70% confident or more, then that's probably a good starting place. Anything less than that, and it may just not be the right starting place for you. And so you could consider revising it. So maybe you decide to change the goal. Maybe you weren't motivated enough for it and something else is more motivating to you. Or maybe it is a change you really want to make, but it was a little bit too ambitious and you need to start off a little bit smaller. And now I'm going to go through some other kinds of ideas that can help you when you're trying to build new habits and set goals. A useful goal is usually one that's just beyond where you are right now. The idea behind it is that if you can make a lot of small stepwise changes, then that's going to be more rewarding and give you more momentum than having a really long-term goal that you've got to wait a long time to feel a sense of accomplishment over. And you also don't want to ask too much of yourself, right? So if I'm eating ice cream 7 nights a week, it's probably not realistic to think that I'm going to go to 0. Maybe I need to start cutting it back 1 night at a time. There's no one number of times that you need to repeat something before it becomes a habit, but as a gross generalization, on average, it can take up to 20 repetitions before our brain is going to recognize a pattern as a habit. And I suppose there's good news and there's bad news in this. The bad news is that it may feel awkward and effortful for a while. The good news is that if you stick with it, eventually it will probably feel just more automatic and it won't take as much effort. Now, as you're going through this process, again, try to envision it, try to troubleshoot and prepare for obstacles as best you can. If you're having trouble getting started, you can try linking the new behavior with an old habit that you're already doing, and then the new habit will hopefully kind of piggyback onto the old one. And I think people do this naturally on their own already. So an example of this might be suddenly you're having to take new medication and you're not used to doing that in the morning, but you do always eat breakfast. And so you take your pills and you put them by your place sitting at the table because you know you're going to remember to eat breakfast, and then you're linking the taking of the medication to the habit that's already really established. Now, depending on who's in your life, you might want to let other people know what you're doing so that they can help and support you, or at the very least get out of the way and not sabotage you. It's often a long-term proposition when we're trying to make lifestyle change, and be sure to celebrate short-term successes. No change is too small to celebrate. It's hard work. Reward yourself and give yourself credit for it. Now, we can set everything up beautifully and there will still be temptation. And so it can be helpful to have some specific plans for dealing with it. And part of this, there's two things that are involved. I suppose part of this gets back to the nature of habits and how it's that quick kind of effortless processing. And so, if we're in a situation that's triggering that, if we wait until we're in the situation and in the middle of it, we may not really have kind of the time, so to speak, for engaging in problem solving and kind of higher, more intense thinking. The other thing is that most of us tend to not do our best problem solving when we're stirred up in some way. And so if we're emotionally stirred up, we may not do our best problem solving, or even if it's like there's kind of the stimulation of, how wonderful that bowl of ice cream looks, or the dessert buffet, or, whatever it is that's tempting you or stirring you up, we're not at our best for problem solving in that moment. And so what we want to do is have a specific plan before we go into it. And that's what the first one is. It's having an if-then plan, where you think about a vulnerable or triggering situation and you come up with a very specific alternative behavior that the hope is that over time it will become the new habit to replace whatever the unhealthy one is. So, if I feel like eating ice cream after dinner, then I will run upstairs and brush my teeth and go out for a walk, right? It's a lot harder to eat ice cream when I'm halfway around the block than if I'm still in my house. And the kind of thing that you fill in is up to you. It might be an action. It might be something that you just do internally. Like, you know, if I feel like smoking when I'm stressed, then I will count to 10, take 5 deep breaths, and remind myself of the progress I've made, you know. So it's up to you. The idea, though, is just that you pick something meaningful and specific, and then even try to rehearse it a little bit so that it's available to you when you need it. Now, oftentimes, when we're faced with temptation or difficulties, a good strategy is to get some separation. Now, if you can physically separate yourself from it, that's great. If you can't, there are some things that you can use to get what we call psychological distance, which is where we try to mentally take a step back from the situation so that we don't feel as sort of emotionally activated, and we are better able to access our problem solving. So what would this look like? One example is that you can try to think of things from a different time perspective. So you're in this tempting situation and you pause and you ask yourself, how am I going to feel about this decision 3 hours from now? And this is useful because, right, we've all had that experience where we act in the moment and then at some later point in time we reflect on it and we say, oh, geez, I wish I hadn't done that. So you can kind of try to get yourself to think of it from a different time perspective. You can also try to take it from first person into third person. So you're in the tempting situation and you pause and you ask yourself, what would I tell my best friend or one of my loved ones to do if they were facing this situation? So now it's not about me, it's about someone else. And we're often better able to advise others than make decisions ourselves, or at least sometimes. And then, as I mentioned before, you know, we can do everything that we feel is appropriate, and we may still slip up sometimes. It happens. Acknowledge it, try to learn from it, and move on. Now, I was talking earlier about how we need repetition to build a habit, and that's important. The downside over time, though, is that when we do the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again, is that we can get bored. And so if you're kind of well on your way with changing habits and you are noticing that you're just kind of not as excited about it anymore, pay attention to that and do something about it. And be sure to realize and take into account the fact that making something more engaging is not the same as making it harder. So certainly there may be points when you're working on your goal where that is appropriate. You're going to add in a certain additional number of healthier meals, or you're going to increase your exercise, and that kind of keeps it new and engaging. But at a certain point, you know, you may be exercising really as much as you can, or you may be eating fish as often as you can. And so then it's about trying to make it seem more interesting. So, you know, maybe you really are eating fish as many times as you can this week and you're getting kind of tired of all of your recipes, but you do still like getting food from restaurants, and you know a restaurant that will prepare it in a healthy way and either deliver it, or, you know, you can drive by and do curbside pickup, and so you put that into the rotation of meals. Or maybe you really are exercising as often as you can and you just can't do any more, but you decide you're going to treat yourself to a new pair of sneakers. So, you know, again, the idea is try to keep it fun and engaging in whatever way you can. Now, the next one on here is one of my favorites. Make the lazy option be the healthy one. It's a lot easier for somebody to eat fruit after dinner if they've got a bowl of fruit on the counter and not a freezer full of ice cream. So take a look at your environment and see if there are ways that you can set it up so that the healthy choice is the easiest one to do. And then I did want to say a few things about procrastination, because I think a lot of us experience that when we're trying something new. And if that's happening to you right now, that's okay. There might be some ways to get started that feel more approachable. And you can almost think of it as like indirect action. So, for example, you may not feel ready to start exercising on your home equipment, but you would be willing to take all the clothing on it off and make it so that you can get to the equipment. Or maybe you aren't ready to get rid of all the junk food in your kitchen, but you would be willing to rearrange where you store it in your cabinets. And now you're not hiding it from yourself, obviously, because you're the one who's moving it, but you're starting by just disrupting the pattern. So now, if you're feeling, bored and you get the munchies and you go into the kitchen, you're not on autopilot going to the same part of the kitchen to pull out the bag of potato chips. Instead, you have to think about where you moved them, and you're breaking the pattern and routine and just increasing the likelihood that you'll have a chance to really consciously think about what you're doing, and you're on your way towards modifying that habit. Pay attention to your environment. I've mentioned some of these things already, but look around, look for triggers, and see if you can reduce those kinds of things that are going to leave you vulnerable towards temptation to do unhealthy things. You can also add into your environment reminders to do the new behavior. So you can leave yourself Post-it notes, or leave your sneakers out, or have your exercise clothes set out the night before, or have that bowl of fruit on the counter. Any number of things can help keep these kinds of goals and changes that we're working on at the front of our mind. People are also part of your environment, so see if there's a way to include them in your plans as well. And then the last few things I wanted to talk about are not directly connected to goals and goal setting, but they are an important backdrop for it. And the first one is to try to get enough sleep. I know there are lots of factors that can interfere with sleep, but really if you can aim to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep and to get it overnight, that's gonna leave you feeling better physically and emotionally, and it'll also help you make lifestyle change, because these kinds of changes take a lot of energy and a lot of brain power, and if we're sleep deprived, it's that much harder. The other thing to think about too is finding some practices that help raise self-awareness, because self-awareness is a big part of all of this. You could try to set aside some quiet time each day to just reflect on how you're feeling and what's going on. Some people like the idea of meditation, and at the end I'll comment on some resources where you can get some introductory instructions to that. If you are still drinking alcohol, try to limit it. Alcohol is a system depressant, and the effect it has on us is that it makes it harder to put on the brakes when we have an impulse to do something, and it also reduces our self-awareness. So those are two factors that can get in the way of you being successful with making changes. And then the last thing I wanted to comment on here was to just say a few words about willpower. Lots of people try to make lifestyle changes and they struggle, and oftentimes people will cite lack of willpower or not enough willpower as something that got in the way. And so people have done research on willpower and what is it and how can we think of it. And the current thinking is that you can think of willpower like a muscle. And there are a few things that follow from this. So with a muscle, when you use it over and over again over a period of time, you build up strength. And so the idea with willpower is that over time, every time you exercise it, every time you use it, you're building up your strength and your ability to make that same kind of decision again. Because what is willpower? Really, it's a form of self-control. It's the ability to delay what would feel good or what we want to do in the moment for some longer term gain or goal. So that's, I guess, sort of the positive side of it. The more downside to that is that with a muscle, when you use it over and over again in a short period of time, it can become fatigued. And so there is this thought that may happen to willpower as well, because we all engage in small and large acts of self-control throughout the day, sometimes without even realizing it. So, for example, maybe you got up earlier than you really wanted to, and then you ate something healthy for breakfast when you really would have wanted the old thing, and then you minded your manners with your family member, or you were polite when you were out in public, and you'd really be rather watching something on Netflix, but you're watching this video right now. So, there's all kinds of ways in which we use our self-control, and so we may make it to the end of the day and be a bit depleted, and so that may leave us more vulnerable to temptations. Simply knowing that can be protective because we can be on the lookout for triggers and responses and try to set up our environment and our circumstances to reduce the likelihood that we'll follow through. And then the other thing is that it's not absolute. And this is where your personal involvement in your plan is really so important, because at the end of the day, when people are in theory depleted, if they're motivated enough, they can get going again. And so, you can think maybe back to a time in the past when you got home at the end of the day and you were just so tired and, oh, you're too tired to exercise. But, if a friend called you and asked you if you wanted to go out to dinner, you were up for that and had plenty of energy. So, there's always exceptions to the rule. And in this case, it seems like what motivates you is really very important. Now here's a list of some of the sources for this information, as well as some additional resources. The American Psychological Association has a lot of information about willpower and lifestyle change. The American Heart Association has a healthy living section, which has fact sheets and points and tips about lifestyle change. The Greater Good Science Center has information about a lot of different kinds of wellness enhancing practices, and if you were interested in starting a meditation practice, they've got a lot of different exercises there that you can do. And the American Heart Association actually also has some introductory instructions. If you are interested in reading more specifically about habits, The Power of Habit is a book that is all about habits. The first section is most relevant to personal change, and the subsequent sections less so. But it is, I think, a worthwhile read in terms of getting information about how habits form and ways that we can shape them in a healthy manner. And then the book Smart Change is all about ways to structure goals that will be useful. And if you have any further questions or concerns, you can be in touch with your coordinator. Thank you for listening.